Good afternoon, everybody. A warm welcome to all of you. My name is Rachna. I'm a program manager with CEGIS and I work on our education projects in Tamil Nadu. To this afternoon, it is my pleasure to invite all of you and so glad that you could join us for the governance dialogue on education. Before we proceed, for today's topic, we just want to share that governance dialogue is an initiative with the CGIS. It's a series of webinar that are anchored by CGIS, which wishes to bring together ecosystem partners to discuss topics relevant to governance and our theory of change. It serves as a forum for exchange of ideas. And we have previously discussed themes such as data use for governance and nutrition. Today is our first edition on the topic of education, and we plan to host many more in the coming days. Today's webinar is titled Working with Markets in Education to Deliver Better Learning Outcomes. And it will specifically be looking at market based supply for education. That is, schools that don't fall exactly under government, that is owned or managed by government. How are these potential channels for improving choice, autonomy, accountability, and learning outcomes? And before we jump ahead and discuss and jump into this wonderful discussion that we have planned for this afternoon, I'll take this opportunity to introduce all of you to the wonderful panel that we have today. It is our privilege to have with us an exceptional panel of speakers whose work is so relevant to the topic that we are discussing today, and we are all very, very excited to hear from them. Joining us today on our panel is Dr. Ivy Subarao, retired IS officer. Uh, Sir, we are so glad you could join us. Sir is from 1979 Andhra Pradesh cadre. He served as secretary to the former Vice President of India, Mr. M. Venkaiah Naidu, and was the principal secretary for education and health in the government of Andhra Pradesh. Dr. Rao has also worked with UNESCO as chief of literacy and non-formal education. Currently, he serves as a fellow at NITI Aayog and as an advisory board member at CSF. Sir, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We also have with us Mr. Kapil Khurana, who's the school governance lead at the Central Square Foundation. He's been working with the Indian state governments to strengthen transparency and accountability for better learning across government and private schools. He has 20 years of experience in K to 12 learning environment with focus on large scale assessments, educational measurement, and policy. He's also founded an edtech enterprise focused on classroom process improvement that supported over 8,000 teachers and 2 lakh learners across early childhood and elementary levels in India as well as Middle East. He began his career as a teacher and a content writer. At CSF, his team supports states to reliably measure learning outcomes and use the evidence to plan informed interventions. Thank you so much, Kapil, for joining us this afternoon. We also have with us Mr. Saurabh Taneja. Saurabh is the CEO of the Akanksha Foundation, a non-profit organization with a mission to impact the lives of low-income children, enabling them to maximize their potential and transform their lives. He leads a team of 1,000 plus educators and staff serving in 27 schools that educate 14,600 children and a network of 5,800 Akanksha alumni across Mumbai, Pune, and Nagpur. Under Saurabh's leadership, Akanksha has set up its operations in Nagpur in a unique public-private partnership and multiplied its impact by partnering with city governments of Nagpur, Pimpri Chinchwad to improve holistic learning outcomes across 200 plus public schools. Saurabh, we are so glad that you're joining us this afternoon. We also want to share that Akanksha Foundation School has been awarded as world's top best schools prize under community collaboration in 2022 and has also been awarded the Nexus Good Award. We also have with us today Mr. M.J. Martin Kennedy. Mr. M.J. Martin Kennedy is the president of the School Voice Association, All Private Schools Association in Tamil Nadu. He's a leading advocate for affordable quality private education, an advocate at the Madras High Court, and a seasoned educationalist with multiple postgraduate degrees. He brings deep legal and academic insight into education policy and school governance. He has led numerous seminars for students, teachers, and school leaders across India, and has been honored nationally and internationally for his contributions to education and social service. Thank you so much, Martin sir, for
Thank you.
joining us
Thank you.
this afternoon. Before
Yeah.
we proceed, I would like to take this moment to introduce the moderator for today. This session is being moderated by Mr. Ramnath Shankaran. He's the lead for education at CEGIS. And we look forward to having this wonderful conversation and discussion over this very, very exciting topic. But before we proceed, would also like to introduce my colleague, Mr. Santosh Kula, who's a senior program manager. Uh, and leads the education work at Telangana for CEGIS. He will be joining us later in the session to provide the closing remarks and the reflections. Thank you so much, Santosh, for joining us this afternoon. And I hand over this discussion to our moderator, Mr. Ramnath.
Hey, thank you so much, Rachna, and a warm welcome to all the panelists. So glad that you've all been able to join. And I'm really looking forward to having a good discussion and learning from most of you as each of you bring in different perspectives through this. So without much ado, I'll get started, but a quick check. Am I audible and clear to everybody? Yeah, wonderful. Great. Before we actually start the panel section, so I just wanted to lay out some context in terms of what we are going to talk about, right? So when we talk about markets in terms of school education, there are different models in which markets are engaged or markets engage in school education. Keeping aside where government is a service provider, government provides the schools, which is most of what we talk about when we talk about school education. So we want to keep that aside and talk about areas where markets are engaged in different formats, right? The first one is obvious that you all know about, which is like the private schools itself, right? So the private unaided schools, where government's role is limited to policy making and regulation, they are not supporting those schools in any form or shape. Then comes the models of private aided schools, where the infrastructure is primarily by the school management, while government supports those schools in terms of teacher salaries and certain schemes that are now provided. And across the country, in different states, the model is different in terms of what exactly government supports, but it is some combination of government support and private ownership as well. Then we also have models where Akanksha and Saurabh are involved, where it is a public-private partnership. The school infrastructure is provided by the government using that infrastructure. The private entities private entities are setting up schools and providing teachers to ensure that there is good quality education coming out of it, right? So these are different forms of public-private partnership. And the last one that I want to talk about is RTE reservations. So in fully unaided private schools, 25% of the seats are reserved for children coming in from economically weaker sections, and government supports those children by providing the appropriate fee to the private schools directly for those children studying. So here is also a scenario where markets are providing the service and government supports them in a particular way, right? So there are different ways in which markets and governments interact when it comes to school education, and these are the models that we will explore in depth today. But before we start exploring these models, just want to lay out the scale of what we are talking about, scale, quality, and all of that of what we are talking about, right? So these models put together are around 45% of the total enrollment that are today in these schools across the country, right? So we are talking about more than 100 million or more than 10 crore children who are studying in these different models of schools. Predominantly the two ones, the private unaided having around 34%, and around 11% being the aided schools, right? It is also worth noting that these numbers have risen significantly in the last 2-3 decades, from around less than 10% in the 90s to in now in mid 2020s it is around 35, 32, 35%. So it has gone up 25% in the last few decades. Now, in this scale, when we look at the quality of education that we see, right? If you look at ASER, NAS, any good quality data that is coming out in terms of learning outcomes, you would see that these schools are only marginally better than the government schools that are there, right? Now, 60% of the schools in students in private schools in grade 5 are not able to do division, which is slightly better than government schools, but not anything significantly better. And similarly across NAS and other grades and all of that, right? So huge scale, quality just about beyond what government schools are offering. Now, when it comes to the cost of the services that are provided by the private schools, if you look at the fees, the monthly fees, the median monthly fees, is around 1,000 rupees in urban context and around 500 rupees in a rural context, right? So that's the per month fees that parents are paying to get the services from these private schools. But it is to be noted that less than 10% of the children pay more than 2,000 per month, right? So a huge number of the 100 million that we spoke about, no, nearly 90 million of those children are paying relatively very low fees, whether it's in no few hundreds a month, is what they are paying. So the low cost segment in private schools accounts for the greatest volume, and it caters to mostly the middle income and the lower middle income kind of demographic, right? That is the demography that is attending private schools. So our typical reaction on private schools, we think of the elite private schools, but that form a very small percentage of the overall private schools. It is predominantly the low fee private schools that are catering to the low and middle income categories, and hence this is an important topic from an equity standpoint as well, right? So it is not about the elite accessing these schools. So just to summarize, this is like a huge scale. We are talking about more than 100 million children who are not getting good quality education coming in from middle and lower middle income groups, right? So that's the kind of schools and children that we're talking about. Having said this context, I would like to now jump in straight into talking about each of these models. The way we have tried to structure the panel discussion today is we'll take up each of these models, private unaided schools, and then the aided kind of schools, and then the RTE model, and then talk a little bit about each one of these things, and then wrap it up with some questions from the audience and reflections from the team, right? With that said, in terms of going ahead with this one, the first one would be on the private unaided schools. Here, if we just to get started on this topic, Kapil, if you can just throw light for our audience on what does the current regulatory framework for private schools look like, right? Private unaided schools, what does it look like? What are the challenges as you see?
Okay. So current regulatory framework is a very broad topic. I think largely this can be bifurcated into two parts. The regulations before RTE Act 2009 and regulations after RTE Act. Currently, we are in the after era, but it might be helpful to know a little bit about what was it before, because this all evolved from there. So before RTE, there was zero central legislation. Every state was having their own framework of regulating schools. So states had their own systems, written laws, unwritten laws, The language they used to register to certify schools was, some states used to call it registration, some states used to call it license. We are giving you license to operate. Some states used to call it permission to operate. Uh, Post 2009, at least that terminology became that there is recognition that will happen in all these schools. Now, the idea was to have some standards for all schools, not just for private unaided schools, but every school should have some basic standards, some basic quality. That was the intention with which this central legislation came. Most of the states had to do away with and repeal all these scattered legislations and enforcements that they had on the school to make it consistent. The center even came up with model RT rules based on which all the states formed their rules. So largely today, if you see, these regulations as they stand today are on minimum land areas, there is classroom size specified, there is playground. The Right to Education Act 2009 has a schedule in the last page that is primarily responsible for laying out what each and every school should have. And this applies to all schools uniformly, including the government schools. So things like what should be the pupil teacher ratio in primary grades, in middle grades, in secondary and higher secondary grades, etc., etc. One thing which was applicable to only private schools, and that you have also touched upon, we'll talk about, is this 25% reservation for economically weaker kids. That also became a regulation that to promote inclusivity, the poor kids also have to be admitted in the private schools so that they can also study without bothering about their financial situation. Then other regulatory environment which exists today is some of the states have controls, fee controls for private schools. These controls come in various shapes and sizes. Some states specify that you cannot increase beyond a specific percentage. Some states actually go to the level of defining how much the ceiling should be in absolute terms for each grade and for the services that the school is offering. So these also comes in various shapes and sizes. The regulations are around teacher hiring, teacher transfers, but these are government regulations to apply on their own schools. So we may choose to not call them regulations. You can call them internal process documents also. But those are also specified in the regulation, so including them in the framework. Some regulations are also around teacher salaries for private schools, that they should be same as government school, which happens to be the least implemented governance measure or regulation. So all in all, if you ask me, what is the current regulatory framework like? It is all well-intentioned, but poorly implemented. And what is really the crux of all these regulations is that each of these force the schools to behave in a certain manner, to say that this is what you will do, or this is what you will provide as an input, this is what you will bring to the table, and hardly talk about what will the school be able to achieve out of all the processes and all the inputs that they are bringing to the table. Rarely you will find a regulation talking about that this should be the learning level of the children. Yeah, this should be the outcome of the education system. So that's where I think we have gone it all wrong. The regulatory framework is largely about inputs, to some extent processes, but rarely about outcomes.
Great. Thanks a lot, Kapil, for that overview that you had provided. And then you had summarized it also well, that saying that no, it is predominantly input based and pretty much standardized, kind of one size fits all, except maybe some nuances around fees and all of that, which is not that standard across the nation, right? So now, moving on to Mr. Martin, sir, if you can throw light on what would a better regulation look like, right? So because you are in touch with a lot of private schools in your role as the president of the Private School Association, what are the typical challenges that they face, and what can make it a better system?
Thank you, sir, for inviting me. And private schools, the ecosystem of budget and low fee institutions have been indispensable to the India's education landscape. Why private schools welcome digitalized regulations? That is, traditionally, regulatory interactions often varied by inspector, district, or even individual district. Digitalized systems with time-stamped submissions, automated acknowledgements, public trackable status, replace person-based decision-making with rule-based governance. So wise, we can reduce the delays, eliminating subject interpretations, creating predictable and timeliness and approval and renewals. See, there is also a type of rental seeking harassments faced by some private school here and there. Okay, repeated physical visits out to the office, withholding the files, missing documents, unofficial payments, all these things. So the schools also vary. It's from rural side to the urban side. Okay, land area requirements also. State board says 6 grounds like in our state, and in the urban area. But in the village, rural areas, it is 2 acres, 3 acres like. Okay, but CBSE says, it is 2 acres and 15 lakhs population or 25 lakhs population in the metro city. It can allow 10 grounds like. Then we have also difficulties. The schools which have started earlier, 40 years, okay, like back, okay, they could not meet out the land norms and other things. So what we need is, okay, uniform thing. We hope it may not fit for the, all the schools together. Because I went to Hyderabad, I went to Delhi, and also I met school leaders there. Okay, there are different problems exist in different states. Okay. So what we can have is shit, and we should also seek separate regulations for the pre-existing schools. For schools, we have already conducted a survey through the Madras High Court when less land schools will face the problem of closure. Okay, so we have done through the expert committee, and they have submitted. They have given remarkable things. But every state there is a problem existing after the RT Act, and you know. They could not able to get renewals every year. Look like, okay, 3 years once. Previously it was given, then it was changed to some states every year, and that too we could not able to get it. So we needed to take all these barriers out. Okay, and we have to go further. Okay, so this is what I know. So we have to give a clear timeliness, standardized checklist, defined appeals process. Small schools have simpler requirements, larger schools have higher responsibilities. So, transparent. Every application is to be tracked, every rejection include reasons, and every inspection is to be recorded. Supportive. Regulation, supportive. It should be facilitate school improvement, not threaten to closure over technicalities. Integrative oriented, digitalized systems must be reduced, discriminative power and opportunities for rental seeking. So learning focused and minimum adequacy must be ensured, but regulation must be ultimately drive better teaching learning. So these are the things you have to see through all these things. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. If I may just quickly summarize, and that will also lead into my next question to Dr. Subarao as well. is what Mr. Martin is saying is that now we need to look at digitization and improving transparency in terms of the regulatory approval process, because it's not just the one-time approval and then there is the every time there's a building safety or a renewal, 3-year renewal or something that's coming up. So it is ongoing interactions with the regulatory body, that we need to reduce the chances of rent seeking and improve digitization and transparency. That is one area. And the other one is around differentiated regulations. Now it is one size fits all. So how can regulations be different for rural versus urban, where the space availability and needs are different, and old versus new schools that have been existing for now several decades now versus what new schools that are coming up new, small schools versus big schools. So which are the ways in which some of these things could potentially be differentiated, and how can
That's
regulations support the schools rather than acting as a threatening factor?
that.
So those are the main points that Mr. Martin was saying. Now, Mr. Subarao, what is your take from a government perspective on some of these things? What are the challenges in getting to certain improved, either both the implementation of the current framework or coming up with these new differentiated frameworks? Sir, you're on mute, sir. We are not able to hear you.
Yeah, thank you, Ramnath. You're able to hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Good. Yeah, I think we have to see the larger context in which entire thing is operating. When the government reviews the education programs, it rarely touches upon what's happening in the private schools. They seem to be two different worlds. And when you come to the regulatory framework, there are rules and regulations in each state. And as Kapil was mentioning, most of them have been touching on the inputs part. How much is the building? What is the, how many staff members, etc., etc. Very rarely do they talk about the actual process and outcomes, which are actually much more important in terms of what the education quality is all about. In my view, I think we should look at a fresh way to build synergies between the two worlds and have a common framework which prioritizes processes and outcomes, and use inputs as something which is non-negotiable actually. What should a good school look like? For instance, if you have a classroom of a particular size, designed in a certain way, there are various ways in which this classroom design can be made, and where it becomes a learning aid itself. Can we have a definition of a school which actually defines it in terms of what is the bare minimum in terms of how much of playground equipment, how much of space should be there for children? Because if we care for children, we will say that this kind of a school is what we define as a good school. And every child has a right to be in a good school, whether managed by the government or by the private bodies. So I think we need to relook at the parameters on which we are actually regulating. And of course, there'll be a differentiated one, because in rural areas, you will definitely have a little more space. But if we fix some bare minimum in terms of what is the definition of a good school in terms of the infrastructure, the staffing, I think that would be the best way to go about it. The second thing is, as you have pointed out, the Parak and NAS results show a very disturbing kind of a picture. Over the years, the government schools as well as the private schools are not showing any dramatic improvement in the outcomes, which is a little disturbing, which means we need to fix the quality issue. There's also an equity issue in terms of economics, but basically, all this should lead to some good classroom processes and classroom outcomes. I think that is the basic issue we need to look at when we sort of build the new regulatory framework in the light of NEP 2020. And that is where I think the School Standards Authority and the quality framework, which is now going to be developed, will play an important role as we move forward. But as it is, this is the tension between the government and the private schools, and it leads to a lot of unnecessary, uh, displeasure in the private sector that government is regulating, and sometimes it is so counterproductive that the private sector feels quite unhappy about it. As Martin was mentioning, there needs to be a transparent. Any regulation, you have to be institute a system which is transparent, which is rule based. If you say you have to have this kind of a minimum facility, there should be no ambiguity about it. And whoever meets that, I think, should get the recognition under the statutes, etc. So one is this implementation part of it, where there should be much less arbitrariness and subjectivity, and this leading to the rent-seeking behavior, as you have mentioned. So I think one is the effective implementation, but I think we need to go to the basics. We need to now think in terms of looking at the school standards quality framework and school standards authority as an independent body, which actually ensures that all our children get something which is of a high quality. 75 years of independence, I think now it's the time for us to rethink quality in schools. And NEP does provide that overall perspective within which I think the states will have to get down to designing it.
Thank you, sir. That was a very interesting and a very important point that you observed as well. That no, it is outcomes are not just poor, but it has not been improving for last several decades, except for the most recent survey where we saw a bump. That puts the spotlight heavily on outcomes. So as we move from the input-based regulations that we have to, sir, what you were talking about, the triple SA that is like outlined in NEP. If I may request Kapil to throw a little bit more light on what is this new a policy in NEP, and what does this regulation mean, and how does this help address problem that Dr. Subarao was just about mentioning?
So, as you started the webinar with Ramnath, unaided private schools, hardly 10% of the children were going to them 2 decades back. Today, the number stands, as per 2025 data, to the 24-25 data, is 38.8%. So 38.8% of our India's school-going population is going to these private schools. Even in aided schools, if you add another about 8 odd percent, that means close to 50%. Half of India is going to these private schools. It's not that these private schools were, and you only mentioned that it's not that these private schools are doing a fantastically much better job in terms of educating children or making them learn than the government schools. The learning outcomes are shaky across the board. What national policy has acknowledged is the fact that both these type of schools exist with the same purpose. Government and private schools exist to educate children. Both these kinds of schools are institutions that will empower the citizens of the future with education. So why should the regulations be any different for both these kinds of institutions? Why can't we have uniform regulation which can uniform standards which apply to all schools, government and private, across? And the context can be specified by the state, where all these differentiated levels of rural versus urban, low fee versus high fee, etc. All these nuances can be considered, but the onus has been left to the states to form an authority, an independent authority that can take an unbiased view of what quality should look like or what quality school should look like, as Subarao sir said, in in the state. Uh, this authority in the national policy talks about setting standards, so laying the minimum standards that should be met by all the schools. Also, the schools who will be measured on these standards, the data will be publicly disclosed to everyone so that the parents can then see where on minimum standards or where on quality frameworks these schools lie, and they can make an informed choice. This information to be disclosed should also be about should necessarily be about outcomes and specifically learning outcomes. That how well are these schools able to make their students learn? Uh, the fundamental question about schooling is, why do schools exist? In the earlier times, we also had schools which were under a tree, and now we are evolved into a situation where we have very fancy classrooms. But the basic essence of a school still remains to make the students learn. The learning can be the scope of learning can be expanded. It need not be about just scholastic, but even co-scholastic, even interpersonal, even 21st century skills. However, the idea is to make students learn. Now, to make students learn, what is it that the schools must have? What is it that the schools must produce? And whether whatever they are producing can be shared with the parents in some form where it is standardized, where it is comparable, where it helps parents make an informed choice. That's the intent, that's the objective of this School Standards Authority in the policy. And because it will govern all schools, government and private, aided and unaided, minority and majority, national and international, whichever is there in India, uh, central board or state board, all the schools it is supposed to govern. Therefore, it is important that this institution is bias free, conflict of interest free. The design itself should take care of the fact that it is not run by the same department or same people who are also running government schools. So those design principles need to be kept in mind while framing the institutional governance structure.
Okay. Great, Kapil. If I may do a quick summary, if I can, of this one. So you're saying the regulations need to move from being more input focused to more outcome focused. Currently, it is on academic or scholastic learning outcomes that are there, and other outcomes can be added later point in time. And two, it is to be disclosure based regulations, right? So the government is not setting a minimum standard, but it is saying let the schools disclose where they are on these things, so that parents can make an informed choice on which school that they should send their child to. And the third point is around uniformity, right? Now it is not just for private schools that we're talking about. We are talking about private schools, government schools, aided schools, small schools, big schools. All types of schools have the same regulation where they should disclose the learning level of children that they've attained in a standard way, so that parents can make informed choices, right?
Right.
Thanks so much for that, Kapil. If I can ask Mr. Martin to provide his thoughts on, so from a private school perspective, right? Now, how do you see such a regulation? Now, how would it help? What are the challenges that you may face when, if and when these things are implemented?
I already gave in my first speech, sir. There are micro schools, low fee schools, and standard schools. Okay, three types of schools existed all over India. Kapil sir said something to be laid down, but the basic needs, okay, or basic qualities of the schools. Okay, that will be good. When it is eighth chapter NEP says about this. Okay, so if there is some uniformity in rules, set of rules, okay, then it will be good for our country to move forward. Okay, that we accept, acknowledge. And there should be outcome based also. Learning outcome based. Okay, and teacher quality, child safety, and community satisfaction. All this should be the part of this one. Okay, they should, and micro school should run, and all type of school should run. There should be you know rules set for like this. Then we do go ahead. No.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Dr. Subarao, on this regulatory framework that Kapil was talking about, that it should be outcome based, it should be based on disclosures, and it should be uniform across these things. What are some of the challenges in implementation of such a thing? While this sounds right? Like, that it should be uniform. It should, same regulation should apply to all schools. We have spoken about outcomes not being there, children are not learning enough, and that this regulation talks about outcome thing. But what are the challenges in terms of either political challenges of taking this forward or implementation challenges? Now, does government have the capacity to implement? When we can say outcome, but now how do we measure it, right? Like, now how do we measure it at scale when we are talking about so many tens of thousands of schools where we need to do? So if you can throw some light on these areas, sir.
Yeah, this is actually the crux of the entire thing, and quite a difficult terrain. How do we actually measure it periodically? And just to step back a little bit, it's not merely the learning outcomes, Ramnath. Uh, I'm also worried about the processes which are going on in schools. What are the learning processes? Otherwise, if you just say learning outcomes, it can be gamed. It can be sort of teaching to the test. It can be different kinds of things which will result in higher learning outcomes on paper. But that's not the spirit of education. I mean, the children should go through the process of schooling in a very different kind of an atmosphere. We say experiential learning, we say inquiry based learning, problem solving as an approach, project based approach. All these are being talked about. But how far are the classrooms being transformed and the children have engaging classrooms? The teachers must engage the students in meaningful learning activities, which ultimately lead to learning outcomes. Now, this is even more difficult for us to observe and measure. But unless we lay down these things as a sort of a reminder that this is the framework, children should have this kind of facility to learn and learn with joy, with meaning, connecting what is happening in the classroom with the external environment, making it more experiential rather than rote learning, etc. You can get very good learning outcomes if your assessment is based on rote learning. So we'll have to fix the assessment part of it and see that the quality of assessment improves, quality of processes improve. I think both of them are very key pieces for me. And so then the quality of teacher education also improves. Teachers must be equipped to handle this learning processes in the classroom in that kind of. So quality has different dimensions. And I think, when a framework is designed, these must get into the narrative. So that, I think, is a very crucial thing for us today, because I find that, if we simply say learning outcomes, I know many schools where they just say what is the kind of test, and then they teach to the test and they ensure that the learning outcomes are good. But that's not the purpose of education. We must go deeply into the other aspects which Kapil briefly touched upon. You need to have some physical activity. We have the cognitive, cognitive, and affective domains in education. So the three domains need equal emphasis. For that, if you need some sports as a curricular activity, in my view, there is nothing like extracurricular and co-curricular. The entire thing is curricular. It has to be made a curricular subject. So if you are having sports in the school, that itself is an important dimension of personality, and it teaches teamwork, etc. All of us know this. But what I'm saying is, we have to define the parameters of quality and ensure that it is done. You start with voluntary disclosure, that's the first step. Then you have periodic surveys, and it could be a joint mission approach, where both the government schools and the private schools have representatives, and they actually go around seeing this, what's happening in our schools. It's not this versus that, but this and that together. So both worlds come together for the sake of the child. I think that's the ideal scenario. We need to have that kind of a trust and the ability to work together. Because if we care for the children, the private sector will also look at what the quality dimension is supposed to be. And then, eventually it's a self-regulation to start with. And I think if we will be iterating this as we go by. If you have some external agency to evaluate, it's also an excellent way to go about it. So the large-scale assessments which are going on, but then they are not census-based. So, they're sample-based assessments. So you don't know exactly each school's learning outcomes or learning processes. So we need to think through this, but this is something you start with voluntary disclosure, then self-regulation, then external validation, and then continuously keep this dialogue between the private sector and the government sector needs to be a continuous process where they learn from each other. I think the NEP also mentions that, some private schools can adopt some government schools as well. So I don't know how that will happen, but at least a dialogue to be built, what's happening in your school. I'm doing like this. So, and there are workshops which the teachers can have together. That's where I think the quality becomes central. Quality of inputs, quality of processes, quality of outcomes.
Thank you so much, sir. Just briefly summarizing your input here. So while we talked a lot about outcomes, so it is not just outcomes. So it is the process as well on how teachers are engaging children. And when we talk about outcome, it is not just the scholastic the learning outcome. It is the combination of everything, the well-rounded children that we all aspire to raise. And in terms of measuring and how do we implement this, your suggestion is that we start off with voluntary disclosure and then move towards surveys, which are sample based to get started and keep the dialogue open, because it is going to be a huge challenge to measure all the schools, all the children. Census based assessments, large scale assessments are expensive and are difficult to implement. So have the dialogue open so that we can proceed down the path while we get started with voluntary disclosure and surveys.
Yeah.
That's great, sir. Now, so that's the direction I think we should be heading in terms of the private unaided schools, in terms of regulations and how we want to go about the implementation of the same. Now, moving on to the next topic or the next model that we had is partnerships between private and government entities, right? And these come in different forms and shapes. But I'll request Saurabh to talk through what is the model that Akanksha is doing. If you can keep it brief, Saurabh, we are already a little lagged on time. On just briefly explain for our audience, what is this public-private partnership? What role does the government play, and what role does the private entities play?
Thank you, Ramnath, and fellow panelists for the perspective that they've offered. I just wanted to mention, Ramnath, that public-private partnership models have now been running for almost 1.5 to 2 decades in the state of Maharashtra, Rajasthan, Punjab, and Delhi. Akanksha was one of the pioneers of this model. beginning with the Pune Municipal Corporation in 2007. And we have now grown from one corporation in urban Maharashtra to five corporations where we are partnering with 27 schools. And the model, like you mentioned, Ramnath, essentially entails that the public school system offers a management contract uh, to a credible non-profit organization such as Akanksha. And in this contract, the public school system offers to us capex, which is the building, repairs and maintenance costs, midday meals, and all the uniform, textbooks, notebooks, etc., that are offered to children. So essentially, the ownership of the school stays with the public school system. However, we then mobilize philanthropic capital to essentially manage the day-to-day operations for the school end to end by having full autonomy on the talent that we are bringing in. And I think that has actually been able to enable Akanksha Foundation run schools or generally PPP schools in Mumbai, Pune to deliver significantly better learning outcomes at similar or a lower cost per pupil. And Ramnath, in the past 7, 8 years now, after having demonstrated the success in the first 10 years in Mumbai Pune region, with three corporations now, Navi Mumbai, Nagpur, and Pimpri Chinchwad. That is almost 13 schools. We are getting capex and the operating expenses as being borne by the government as well. And by OPEX, what I mean is that they are sharing anywhere between 30 to 40% of cost per child, which comes to us in the form of reimbursement after having gone through a very fair request for proposal tendering process end to end, which spoke a lot about processes like Dr. Ivy Subarao was talking about, as well as performance guidelines. And we get, measured by these on a 1 year, 3 year, and 5 year basis before the renewal of the contract. Ramnath, I'm going to pause here. All our schools, barring one school, are state board aligned, but we have enough autonomy to blend more forward-looking pedagogy and curriculum to become like hubs of inspiration for NEP practices as well. Yeah.
So, thanks, Saurabh, for that introduction that you provided to this model. I think that's quite useful to know that these have been in existence for like now more than a decade, nearly 2 decades now, and government provides most of the infrastructure while now the private entity like Akanksha brings in the OPEX, and you're slowly moving towards government taking on some part of the OPEX piece as well, providing 30-40% of the teachers and salary cost, and while holding you accountable on certain outcomes on this one, right? That's great to know. Now, if we can dive a little deeper on like now, how is this different from a regular tender process or something? On how does government select for laying a road as an example, right? Versus this process. So how does government select a provider? Because when it comes to education, we need to be a little careful about who are the people coming in, and how does the government select, and how do we avoid some of the wrong decisions being taken on this front. So if you can walk us through the selection and how does that happen?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very pertinent point, Ramnath, in being able to scale this. I think the framing of the request for proposal or the tenders has to be done very thoughtfully. And in all of our experience in the last 7, 8 years, the best thing that all the three city corporations that we have partnered with, actually there are five because other than Akanksha, there is one more organization, IT Schools, that has won the tender. These are all QCBS tenders and not L1 tenders. The quality criteria very stringently talks about organizational performance and context in having supported children from low income communities. That is a prerequisite to even apply for it. And then there are very stringent norms around financial health of the organization, integrity, credibility, board, how much bank guarantee, etc., that we need to be able to secure and demonstrated learning outcomes impact that we have been able to do over the past 5 to 7 years in the form of grade 10th exam, any third party evaluation, and then the committees at the city level headed by the commissioner, or in some cases the local corporators as well, evaluate operators to come forward, make the presentation, and only then they will go through the financial bid process, Ramnath. And it has been an iterative process. And in the most recent tender that we have just been awarded with Pimpri Chinchwad city government, we have seen that the journey from the first time that we won it with Navi Mumbai to Pimpri Chinchwad, there has been a much more credible approach now as well. That we have noticed, Ramnath. So I think the city commissioners and the city governments are opening up to the possibilities that this is feasible. At the same time, there is a very credible concern on their mind that they don't want to award tenders to, certain parties whose agenda may be different. And therefore, one thing that we have seen that works best is the cost sharing. What we did not talk about in the public-private partnership model is that we are not expecting the city government to give 100% OPEX, but anywhere between 50 to 75%. And that automatically means that you are bringing organizations who have the ability to mobilize CSR capital or individual philanthropic capital. And so therefore you are really here for the children. You are really here to demonstrate that the schools work. And you're not here for any other money-making motive, which is what their biggest concern always has been. And so I think that helps, that there is no 100% cost sharing, where one can actually, create fake documents and IDs, etc., to get that going.
Thanks, Saurabh. That is quite helpful. On that note, talking to Dr. Subarao, sir, how do you see this from a political standpoint, right? Is this model politically viable? What are the enabling conditions where government can potentially engage private entities like this? Because this is prone to criticism, and it is prone to risks of in some cases selecting the wrong provider. And so what would be enabling conditions where this can happen? Or do you also see certain scenarios like the city commissioners being able to do this, while in a rural setting this may not be possible? Anything along those lines, sir?
Yeah, I think Maharashtra is very fortunate that you have been able to put in place this kind of a public-private partnership. It's quite rare in India. We tried it out way back in Andhra, and there was a big hue and cry. The political uproar was quite loud. They said we are privatizing the government schools. That's the main kind of an argument against it. And that we are just letting the private entities make a profit, and also introduce their own ideology in some cases. There are various shades of, opinion which was there, but ultimately we had to give up. Something like we tried to do something with reputed institutions like Ramakrishna Mission, which have no profit motive, and they do things for service, but it wasn't agreed to. The political elite just did not agree to this kind of an arrangement. But I'm happy to hear Saurabh's experience in Maharashtra. I think the political executive needs to buy in this argument and be able to put in place a very transparent kind of a process. I'm very happy that those criteria which you have mentioned, which they have been following, and iteration over a period of time to make it even better, creates a level playing field for anyone, and then you have got the right metrics there. So I think it's a combination of the political will. If there is no political will, it just won't happen. And you need to then put in place a transparent methodology to get into this partnership. That's, I think, very important. Yeah, I'm not seeing it as a general way in which this will happen across the country. It will differ from state to state, and in each state also, who is in power at that point of time, and then whether they actually believe that this is something which is the way forward. The other difficulty was that the teachers felt threatened. The government teachers felt very threatened that their jobs are going to be somehow going away. That's a major perception which was there at that time. And so then the argument was that, well, if you are paying the teachers' salaries, you have a building which you already have. The entire investment is being put in by the government. So what does the private sector bring in to this? So that must be also clearly defined, and which has been now defined. Saurabh's presentation makes it clear. So I think I would say this is a good model, but it's not going to be universal across the country in the near future. Where it's possible, we should make it better and make it work for the children.
Thank you, sir. On that note, question to both Dr. Subarao and to Saurabh, right? No, so it is quite understood that no, this is not a model that can scale significantly, right? No, this is not going to be 10-20% of our school system or something like that. That is not how this is going to go, right? But at the same time, what are the places or either geographies or certain communities that this can serve? What are the places in which this is a good model to try out? And even to that, even if it is say 2% of the overall schooling system nationally, it is still a significant amount of money that needs to be raised from the philanthropic world, right? Saurabh, we are running some 25, 30 schools. If you're talking about 1-2%, we are talking about many hundreds and thousands of schools, right? So that itself is a significant amount of money. So how do we both now choose where to scale and how do we scale also? Any thoughts that you have on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in, sir, if that's okay.
Yeah, please, Saurabh. You have
Yeah.
a ground level and recent experience.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you so much, sir, for that perspective as well. You're absolutely right. In the initial years, we also faced a lot of backlash where this was perceived as privatization until the local politicians themselves started sending their children or their helps children to our schools for recommendation because it's a fair lottery-based selection process. We now have oversubscribed applications for every one seat. I have 4 applications in the waiting. It's a gender neutral admission. So every year we admit 40 or 80 children in junior kindergarten. And the way we sort of identified in playing in this case, sir, was that unfortunately, there are several public schools that are losing enrollment, especially in the urban regions of Maharashtra that we are noticing. So they only have empty public buildings. And in several cases, we are sharing a public school building. One thing that we did, we were able to create an innovative space for us is that all our schools are English medium. And in the first few years, we are bilingual medium. And we are actually addressing the parental aspiration where they are, instead of sending their wards to private schools or affordable private schools, they are choosing Akanksha PPP run schools because there is zero fees for them. And so I think we've now come to a stage where, having demonstrated impact for 10, 12 years, there's enough credibility that at least Akanksha is not in it for any other reasons, and nor are many other organizations. And so what we are discovering, sir, is that there are still several buildings today that are dysfunctional, not in use at all. And there is enough capacity for us to raise. And, in Nagpur, thanks to the push from the CM as well as the political ministers, we are doubling our number of schools from 6 to 12. And so, Ramnath, we are already in urban regions of Maharashtra, catering to nearly 10% of the total children, even if not the number of schools, right? And so, if our goal is, even in these urban regions where we believe that PPP models may be much more successful, the scale pathway here, I would say the next scale pathway really is to get a state to create a simple guideline and framework so that it is not at the discretion of changing commissioners or city governments to then fiddle around with the management contract tender guideline. So even Professor Karthik Muralidharan, when he addressed our board, mentioned that if we could find a way to be able to demonstrate the evidence that's now been generated to do the serious experiment at the scale of 500 schools, right, in one particular state. Yeah, let's just take the state of Maharashtra, if that's most progressive and open to such ideas. Even that would give us enough evidence over the next 5 to 7 years that is that investment leading to greater innovation and learning outcomes with reduced, cost to the exchequer, right? And so we are of the view that from 10%, we can actually begin to cater to 20 to 25% of the children in urban centers of Maharashtra over the next 5 years itself, if there is a friendly yet credible state level guideline that can actually minimize the subjectivity sometimes that could come in at every city government level. That's my perspective, and we are actually discussing these things with the city level commissioners as well as the CM's office to see what might be most helpful to do it in a very credible and forward looking way so that you keep only the credible players who come into this frame, Ramnath. But I would love to hear, Rao sir's perspective on this.
Yeah. No, it's a good point, Saurabh. We should do this. But an alternative formulation for this, is synergizing the efforts of the private sector and the government. If we have some kind of a body at the district level, we may call it the District Program Management Unit or something, DPMU, in which you have private players and the government, and private players would also involve those donors, philanthropists who are also committed to education, have a DPMU which focuses on quality, and you bring in the CSR components, etc. That investment comes in because government may not be all that great in terms of channelizing these resources. There will be some dedicated person who will do it and who has connect with the larger donor base. So create that and have some kind of a focus on the pedagogy in the classrooms and ensure that the processes and outcomes are achieved across the board in all the government schools as well as private schools. I think we'll have to build this into a coherent system. That is one thought which has been with me, that when you have a large diaspora, for instance, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, and many states, you have people who live abroad, they're willing to donate. But you create a platform for them to do so and connect with the schools and improve the school system itself. So how do you build this public-private partnership in a slightly different way, where it's not school to school, but district as a unit, you take a coherent picture so that, the private schools can act as hubs of transformation. Some government schools will also act as hubs of transformation because some faculty may be good. They might also provide some kind of a new impetus to quality improvement. So it's not, I said either or, but both government and private. I think the rhetoric will have to change a little bit, not a little bit, quite a bit. Presently, it is this versus that, that versus should go, and we should create a new poetry of education. It's not that versus, but it's a verse which it shouldn't go to
partnership
verse situation. We must keep on constantly improving.
And this is an effort towards that, sir. Now, how do we get
I know.
public and
That's
private
right.
to talk to each
No, but
other?
this is a great model. Saurabh's model is also great. But I'm just looking at the replicability of it across the system. But this
Absolutely.
might be another way to look at it, where you bring that synergy through a district education program management units.
That's absolutely a great point, sir. I just wanted to mention one point, Ramnath and Rao, sir, that in the cities where we are operating right now, we've actually enabled setting up of a PPP cell. And that cell then can do a lot of your bridge building between PPP models as well as the rest of the public schools and mobilize, local philanthropic capital in a very cohesive, synergistic way. And sir, you would be actually very pleasantly surprised that Pimpri Chinchwad government in the last 3 to 4 years is one of the only city governments that has shown positive enrollment trend in its rest of the public schools. Because Akanksha Foundation is running 6 schools in partnership, and we helped catalyze the rest of the 100 school ecosystem. And the enrollment has increased by 13%, not just in the ones that PPP schools are being run, but in rest of the school system as well. So we will never be able to run all public schools, but we can offer hubs of inspiration and excellence to say that, hey, this is possible that in a public school setup, children from the lowest income communities, free of cost, in same circumstances, can achieve life-changing outcomes. And we are willing to partner in a way that it's a bridge building. And PPP cell, like what you mentioned, at a district or city level, can actually be that sort of a catalyst,
Yeah,
to enable that transformation.
good.
Okay, sure. One last question that I have on this before we move on is on that. No, so are there specific, if any of you have an opinion on this, on are there specific, like, no, urban works better for this model, or we need to target these vulnerable population through this? So because this is not going to be the regular scale that we talk about, right? We need to be very selective in terms of, where we apply this one. So if you had a choice of applying this, now what are the places in which we should be applying this rather than like, no, okay, I'll just randomly take 5 schools and run. Sir, Rao sir, if you have any thoughts on this.
No, I have no particular opinion on this, but the tribal areas, the remote rural areas are really problematic. We'll have to take care of those populations. And I think the onus is currently on the government, and the government is not doing a very great job at the moment. So we need to recognize those gaps in development, and then a PPP model may work to a great advantage in that kind of a setting as well. That's my initial thought.
Great. So now we are into the last 15 minutes or so. We had one more topic to cover, which is on the RT reservation. But we'll pause that to take a few questions from the audience. And then if we do get time, we'll come back to the RT reservation topic. And I saw a bunch of questions that were posted there. I will take up a few and then post it to the panelist. This one is from Ankit. He had asked 2, 3 questions, and we have consolidated that into one. So, if an independent regulator publishes reliable data showing government schools performing poorly, what pressures might arise from the education department and the teacher unions to block or dilute public disclosure? Because we talked about outcome-based public disclosure. So even if we form an independent regulator, how independent will that regulator be? And if they're able to show, if when they start measuring and showing, if that portrays government schools in poor light, then what kind of pressures will government face, and how to avoid that resistance? Dr. Rao, if you can take that question, please.
Well, I think that is a reality. It will happen. But it's a desirable outcome of having a regulatory framework. We must be even-handed, because it's not who provides education. It is for whom we are providing education, and how is that quality. So I think a sort of a different orientation and a mindset will have to come in, and that has to be created, through various ways in which it can be done. But I think, government itself should hold its own system accountable, and it will happen. It's happening, but not in conjunction with the private sector. The general perception is that okay, government will do whatever, but we'll hold only the private sector accountable. So when we have a regulation which is uniformly to be applied, I think gradually the mindset will change, and we will have to ensure that there'll be a kind of an improvement within the government setup itself, and it'll gradually evolve. But I think a dialogue is required, which I find today it's missing. The dialogue between the government and the private sector is going on at a very peripheral level, if at all there is a dialogue, and it's not concerning the basic premise on which our entire system is built, which is to care for the learning of the child. There are bureaucracies which have expanded, and they are not fit for purpose, honestly, today. We need to reinvent educational governance as a whole, and this might be a good lever to start with.
Thank you, sir. The earlier question was, I believe, from Ganesh and not from Ankit. We'll ask Ankit's question shortly. Prior to that, there is one question from Mayur on charter schools were one of the best models. I don't know best models where, but do we need to take a relook at such aided school models from the scratch? Should we look at like now? So while in the Akanksha model, there is a percentage that is shared. Charter school is taking it to a little bit more on that side. So is that something that we can or we should even be exploring?
What do you think, Saurabh?
I am a big believer of that, sir, and I think there is if we can find a more nuanced way to infuse the system with energy and innovation of charters, not in a way that it will replace all the public schools in any way, but with stringent management contracts, yet giving enough autonomy. We are learning that it can catalyze the entire public school system in a non-threatening partnership way. It takes time. It happens. We are noticing it over and over again. And I personally do not have much of a view on aided schools. My learning, at least the last couple of years back, was that aided school enrollment has stagnated. Given where it stands, I don't know even if a relook of that will fundamentally become like a catalyst for further reform. So my bias is limited, but more towards charter school like PPP schools or academies. And we're noticing that some of the global South countries, especially in Africa, now have also gone that route, sir. And like you mentioned, secondary schools in Liberia and Uganda, in some of the hardest to reach areas, in urban areas, are being run in PPP models with credible evidence that they are demonstrating much better learning outcome success with lesser per pupil funding.
Yeah, value for money.
Yeah. On the note of now lesser per pupil funding, so how does the PPP model in terms of now the net cost of resources, net cost across all of this? No? There is some amount that is being spent by the private entities coming in, and there is some that is being provided by government, either as OPEX or as CAPEX. So how does this compare with, say, like now government providing service on its own? Do you have any thoughts or any information on that, Saurabh?
I can give some numbers for everyone's perspective. And the numbers that were available in public domain are from Bombay Corporation from 3 years ago, from Praja Report, which used to list the public expenditure. At that moment in time, Mumbai government schools designated budget per pupil was almost 1 lakh rupees per child per annum. Even if you assume that about 2/3 of that was going on OPEX, their cost per child was 65,000. Akanksha Foundation's cost per child 3 years back was between 45 to 50,000 per child per annum. So we can actually, and very recently, I don't have the liberty to share those numbers openly, but in conversations with city commissioners and education department, we are learning that Akanksha Foundation's operating cost per child is 10 to 15% lower than what the city governments are spending. And I'm not talking about the state government, because state government expenses in Maharashtra are different. But I'm talking about the city governments where we are operating. They're 10 to 15% lower, Ramnath, as we speak, in Pimpri Chinchwad, in Nagpur. And the reason being that actually we are not paying our teachers as per the seventh pay commission. We pay them as per sixth pay commission, because, and that's where the autonomy lies, but they are all qualified teachers as per the state norms. They should have cleared TET. They should be B.Ed, D.Ed diploma and education holders. And as long as they're coming from credible institutes and are meeting the guideline, the autonomy on how much we are able to pay and yet deliver learning outcomes is still significantly higher.
On that note, another question from one of our participants today, Ankit. He's asking, should there be a view on low salaries to teachers in private schools, right? You talked about, like, no, in this model, it is as per the sixth pay commission. But in private schools, there is no specific salary limit, right? No, it can be anything from very low salary to, like, no, high salary, depending on the school and its resources. How should cost effectiveness be seen in this regard? Here, I would like Mr. Martin also to share his thoughts on salaries in private schools, sir. Sir, you're on mute. Yeah, you can hear you now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We are being restricted by the fee committee, sir, in many states. And if you compare the pay commissions, we could not able to provide the salary for the teachers as per the pay commission. Okay, latest pay commission also. Because we are being restricted by the fee committee, because we have to submit and the locality of the institution, and as you said, in the urban side and in the the village side, the rural side, okay, the fee collections is comparatively, so that's a point, and that's why we could not able to meet out that the pay commissions. Okay.
So, Mr. Martin, the primary constraint is that no, there is a fee that is being fixed by the fee regulation committee in different states, and that limits your ability to collect fee from children, and that in turn limits your ability to pay out teacher salaries. Is that the right understanding, Mr.
Number of teacher also, 40:1 or 30:1 per section. Okay, and there should be, and also, it restricts as per the area. Okay, in few states, if it is in city, okay, it is A class, and if it's in a taluk B and it is in rural C, okay, that is also like that. Okay, so fee committee is certainly restricting, and people also should be capable of paying fees, because there is 6,000 per year, okay, to elite schools 1 lakh and add. Okay, so there is vast difference. Okay, but we need teacher force for each section because of the student safety. Okay, so we could not be able to match it out. Okay, the collections of fee and the salary a proportionate is not enough to meet it out. That is a problem, sir.
Thank you, sir. Understood. We'll take one last question before I pass it on to Santosh to summarize. And this question comes from Lipsa, where she talks about secondary education, right? Because some of our focus in this conversation, though we did not explicitly mention, it has been on the primary education, but private secondary education has also expanded in a country. While initially there was a focus on primary, now it has expanded to secondary. And is there a model that can evolve in India where secondary education becomes more affordable, compulsory, like what we have for primary education, what kind of regulatory and governance innovations would be needed to focus on quality outcomes for secondary education? Any thoughts that any of the panelists that you have would request you to share?
Yeah, I can take it up. In secondary education, the quality framework in one way is already established where the state controls exit from the schooling and entry into the tertiary education. Uh, a 12th pass has to be done from one of the recognized state boards, irrespective of the kind of school that you are in, so that you are eligible for tertiary education. So at least that gate has always been there. Uh, but that has not really led to the schools, focusing on real quality. Uh, so far, NEP has come up with the guideline that the secondary education should also be provided from the state side. Schooling right from pre-primary to 12th should be offered from the state side as an option, and should not be just, the government schools which are there, they charge fees from ninth onwards, they're allowed to. However, the policy does say that it should be offered from the state side. No regulation, no enforcement has been made onto states about that yet. However, since policy has mentioned it, the states are taking cognizance. My sense is that in the next 3 to 4 years, we could see the focus also shifting on mandating provision of secondary education also in these states. To some extent, it is happening where states have taken initiatives like for the girl child, it is free. For the minorities, it is free, but it is coming from specified departmental, specific sub-department budgets which are focused on these programs or initiatives, but not as a standard educational provision. So
Can
my
I
sense
just
is it's not
briefly touch upon the most important thing in secondary education today, among many other things? We don't have enough school spaces in terms of, how many 11th and 12th class provisions are there in schools today. And in some states, you have some, the middle, intermediate or PUC kind of a thing, which hangs somewhere in between, and this is actually a very serious issue because that's the age when, the adolescent age where children are looking for career opportunities, they're looking for transition to world of work, but very little in terms of, the right kind of pedagogy which goes into the secondary school. I think it's very rare that somebody is focusing on that. Apart from, the budgeting and all that, uh, I think dropouts are quite substantial, and there are various reasons why this is happening. And so the assessment piece, I think, is another big chunk of reform which is required. CBSE has recently started on that, making it more competency based rather than rote memorization. And then you have private coaching centers which are running a huge business in many of the southern states. And I see that, there's a lot of uh, reform process which needs to be set in motion as far as secondary is concerned. Assessment reform, pedagogical reform, and ensuring that there are counselors in each school to address the socio-emotional dimensions of learning for the learners at that moment, career counseling, as well as, ensuring that they grow up in a very safe and emotionally conducive environment. I think that's a big chunk of reform which we should closely look at and do something about.
On that note, thank you so much, Dr. Rao and other panelists. We did have a lot more questions coming up from the audience, but due to paucity of time, we had to take up only a few of them. I now pass it on to Santosh to wrap up the session with his reflections.
Thank you, Ramnath. Definitely very informative and enlightening. So, would like to summarize. Of course, I may not be able to summarize with all the knowledge that we captured today, but I'll try to capture with whatever best I can. With respect to private schools unaided, the problems identified are regulations focused on inputs and not outcomes, right? And mostly it's one size fits all regulatory approach. Similarly, the intent is good, but the implementation is poor. Limited focus is on private school process and outcomes in government policy, and opaque assessments and renewal mechanisms. Whereas the recommendations suggested by our panelists are shift to outcome-based school quality regulation focusing on holistic development of the child and not just on learning outcomes itself. Similarly, establishments of state school standards authority as an independent body where they can help in terms of the regulation should be supportive and try to provide remediate issues rather than just being punitive on the private school managements. And also the approach should be supportive both for private as well as for the government. And lastly, a voluntary disclosure of the information by the private schools is most welcoming. And third-party evaluation should be encouraged, especially to ensure the data is, of good quality. Now, coming to the private public schools partnerships and aided schools, the problems identified are fear from teachers and lack of political will, and lack of clarity on the role and value addition of private players with respect to this model. And also currently the model itself is at very nascent stage, right? The framework, and it is evolving now. The recommendation is to adopt QCBS, which is quality and cost-based selection, instead of L1 to ensure that we are getting good players, and also tailor PPP frameworks to the regional needs, not just one size fits all sort of a thing, and establish DPMU or PPP cells for systemic-wide practice transfers. So again, I hope I have summarized. Thank you to our panelists and everyone who participated in today's session. Hope you really had a chance to understand how the sector works and the questions are informative. Your inputs and reflections made the discussion rich and meaningful. And thank you again.